Hip fracture audit is embedded in the care of patients in a number of countries now, over 20 when we last counted. And national hip fracture audits can look really intimidating. They're hugely powerful with huge numbers of patients and huge detail being collected. That very power can make it intimidating for you to think about trying to do hip fracture audit in a small hospital, in your department, for your patients on your firm, or in a collaborative of a number of hospitals in an area. But until you've dipped your toe in the water of hip fracture audit, you don't really know how useful it can be. Certainly when I started as an orthogeriatrician 30 years ago, the first thing I did was to set up an audit in our department, which allowed me to know more about the department than anybody else, allowed me to be the first person in the hospital to know how many patients came in with hip fracture. And that data-driven understanding of what was going on with hip fracture was fundamental to the way in which my service developed, my works developed, and the National Hip Fracture database in the UK is one of the eventual consequences of it. But what we started with was a very simple Excel spreadsheet. In fact, what we started was as you can see in this picture of Sue Beck, who did all this work with me, was a piece of paper recording information in a very simple form. What we've tried to do working in the FFN's Hip Fracture Audit Special Interest Group is to create an entry-level, simple introduction to hip fracture in the form of an Excel spreadsheet designed to help you run a sprint audit of hip fracture in your hospital. The Excel spreadsheet is freestanding. You can download it. It sits in your computer. The data doesn't go anywhere else. It's in your computer, in your hospital. And there's no issues in terms of information governance and confidentiality beyond the ones that would be normal for you in your hospital, in your country. There's no sharing of data outside that sort of system. So this is a secure thing that you can play with and use within the rules that would apply in your own country and in your own hospital. The spreadsheet has three sheets. The first is an introduction with some simple comments about how the process works, and at the bottom of it a link to this video. The idea behind it is that you want to be able to look at how care in your hospital compares with the care in established national audits from around the world. We've got a wealth of data from different countries with different health services, and the way in which patients present, the demographics of patients in those countries, and the nature of the care that they receive after they come into hospital. So all that data is already in existence. It's been mapped against the minimum common data set for hip fracture, which is developed by the FFN Special Interest Group, which has been published. A reference to that is again within the spreadsheet, so you can go and have a look at that. But what that defines is that the minimum number of pieces of information you can collect, you should try and collect, if you want to get a real sense of who's coming into your unit and how things are working. So those are the questions set out down here, and these are the sort of answers and the categorization that we have for those answers. And what we want to know is what's going on in your hospital, your department, your team, or your country. So we need to know what numbers you would put against all these figures to give a sense of how hip fracture care works in your hospital. And we do that using the third sheet, and that's a spreadsheet setting out the questions, the fields of the minimum common data set, and then a little bit of explanation of what would be needed to record against each of those. The minimum common data set uses questions and answers that are quite consistently used across many different audits, and again that's been looked at and published, and again the references are available in the spreadsheet. Some of those questions should be fairly obvious, and it's unlikely that any of you would struggle to tell me whether this was a left or a right hip, but the way in which you might record other aspects of patient care could be more complicated. But the intention is to try and give you a sense of the key pieces of information and to see if it's possible for you to collect information on your patients. The way in which each question is scored is given in this sort of examples here in this column, but you want to start entering information on patients for your hospital to see how things would work. So you can do that by going to talk to patients and collect information from them directly, but in general, this information is already sitting there in the patient's notes or indeed in computer records. So you can pull this information very quickly from other sources. And we're not asking you to collect information that you wouldn't routinely collect as part of patient care. We don't want to make patient care more difficult. We don't want to give you more work to do. We just want you to make a systematic approach to collecting the sort of information that you already know that you need to know, but putting it in a structure that allows you to look in a coherent fashion at the patients you have with you. You don't want to just go onto the ward and say, well, look, there are 40 people in the various wards of my hospital at the moment. I'll see what's going on with them and I'll record all of them. Because the longer stay patients are the people who tend to be in hospital, and the easier, the simpler, the fitter patients who've gone home very quickly will be underrepresented. That would be a biased approach to doing things. In just the same way as the anecdotes that people tell each other in team meetings are very biased towards the catastrophes, the disasters, the problems, the difficult operations, the difficult patients, you don't get a clear picture. So if you want to collect patient information, you need to collect patients who come in one after another, consecutive admissions, perhaps over the course of a month, 2 months, 3 months, a few months, depending on how big your department is, till you start to get a consistent picture of what's happening. And then if you add data, on the patients who've come in over time, so if you add data on the patients who've come in over a short period of time, you'll find that as the figures go in here, the computer will automatically start calculating percentage figures and reporting the figures over here. These will calculate for themselves. You'll get these numbers automatically collected. Not only will they collect here, but in the benchmarking table, they'll appear, and you start to be able to look at what's going on in your hospital against the other hospitals of the world. That's powerful. It's all very well to be able to tell your colleagues that the sort of patients who you're seeing are like this. That's not a very interesting graph to put up in a meeting to talk about with your department. But setting those figures against the figures from other countries produces a much more interesting, much more engaging presentation. So it's much easier for you to then encourage your colleagues to start taking the potential of hip fracture audit seriously. And of course, if you're collecting data across all the fields of the MCD and you're able to plot it against what's going on in other countries, you're potentially producing powerful reports that will capture a real sense of how care in your hospital, your region, your country compares with international pictures, how what's been done in terms of research and quality improvement in other countries might have something to tell you in your country. And those sort of presentations, those sort of findings are fundamental to encouraging people to support audit, getting your colleagues to support audit, but also to getting people who might fund a process that you've run over a month or two to be a more continuous audit, or to be a more detailed audit, or actually to become something that is routine in your country across numerous hospitals. So we hope that this tool will function for you as a toe in the water and a first opportunity for you, or indeed one of your trainees, a keen trainee or a member of the team who wants to go away and start doing a project, to start understanding the complexities, the potential, and some of the practicalities of running hip fracture audit. Thank you.